There's a concept called a perfect storm. This is when otherwise negative factors come together at just the precise time and the precise moment, and something that would have otherwise in an ordinary day been a small challenge becomes just a total catastrophe. An example is the Titanic. The Titanic hit the iceberg at a time when it was almost running at full charge, and because it was designed for comfort, the deck had been relieved of quite a number of life-saving boats and equipment to create more space for things to be scenic, and then the accident happens at night. So just the whole idea of it happening at the night, the boat is at full steam, there's not enough boats, and there'd been a lot of partying on the boat, and therefore the boats that would have come to, the other ships that have come to its rescue were not too sure if some of the signals and the flares they were seeing were calls for distress or just a lot of the partying that was happening. And so the confluence of all of those factors came together to create one of the most popular maritime disasters. And a lot of that comes very true when you think about raising the next generation, because most of them are right now in the stage of life where there is so many things happening at a very critical formative stage in life, their quarter life. At the time when they're making important decisions in life, they are thrust into this ever-spinning change that is happening around them. It will need intentional, deliberate effort to safely guide them through the corridors of this development as they navigate this transition. We indeed need to come very close to a generation in transition. Otherwise, what could have been a transition that will take them to a proper next level could end up being just creating the perfect environment for the perfect storm. To prevent the next perfect storm and instead be able to catalyze the next perfect transition, we'll need intentionality if we are going to help this generation in transit. Adole si ugonjwa. That's a funny remark we make in Swahili in Kenya, especially in the street Swahili called Shen. And what it means is that adolescence is not disease. And it's used both encouragingly and derogatorily. Encouragingly, it's used to remind the adolescents when they're trying to make sense of their changing world internally and externally that happens during their adolescence, that what they're going through is not a disease. Derogatorily, it's used when trying to get an adolescent to change their ways and turn around, and they are struggling with it, and a frustrated person tells them adolescence is not a disease, just get a hold of yourself and get things turning around. The next generation is currently in their teens, in their adolescence, and in their quarter life stage. And if we treat it like it is with this particular mantra, Adole si ugonjwa, adolescence is not a disease, it'll make the difference between whether we successfully help them through the crucial transitions or whether they make a wreck. My name is Saya. This is Authentic Conversations about charts you and I would rather avoid, Season 2. Specifically, we're talking about how to raise the next generation in an authentic manner. This is ACACIA Season 2. Specifically, it's raising an authentic generation. Welcome. When you read the story of the prodigal son, that has been our guiding story as we are examining the whole question of how to raise the next generation to become real people with real skills for the real world, and knowing that a failure in any one of those 3 points would become a catastrophe. If we don't have real people, or they don't have real skills, or the world they're preparing for is not the real world, then there'll be a problem. The story of the prodigal son tells us about stages of development. Just can you track them as we have the whole passage read to us again in Luke chapter 11, from Luke chapter 15 from verse 11 through to the end, 32, just think about the various stages this young man goes to. And let's catch up on the next side.
Jesus continued, "There was a man who had 2 sons. The younger one said to his father, 'Father, give me my share of the estate.' So he divided his property between them. Not long after that, the younger son got together all he had, set off for a distant country, and there squandered his wealth in wild living. After he had spent everything, there was a severe famine in that whole country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to a citizen of that country, who sent him to his fields to feed pigs. He longed to fill his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything. When he came to his senses, he said, 'How many of my father's hired servants have food to spare, and here I am starving to death? I will set out and go back to my father and say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants.' So he got up and went to his father. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son, threw his arms around him, and kissed him. The son said to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son.' But the father said to his servants, 'Quick, bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Bring the fattened calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found.' So they began to celebrate. Meanwhile, the older son was in the field. When he came near the house, he heard music and dancing. So he called one of the servants and asked him what was going on. 'Your brother has come,' he replied, 'and your father has killed the fattened calf because he has him back safe and sound.' The older brother became angry and refused to go in. So his father went out and pleaded with him. But he answered his father, 'Look, all these years I have been slaving for you and never disobeyed your orders. Yet you never gave me even a younger goat, so I could celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours, who has squandered your property with prostitutes, come home, you kill the fattened calf for him.' 'My son,' the father said, 'you are always with me, and everything I have is yours. But we had to celebrate and be glad, because this brother of yours was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found.'"
Now, we are not told in terms of years, the amount of time that elapses. Would assume that the story happens quickly, but again, there's no reason, and a definition of quickly may vary. Maybe for you, months is quickly, maybe years is quickly. But one thing is for sure, the more juvenile mindset that the prodigal boy who left home has at the beginning of the story is way more changed than the more penitent boy who's experienced life and has gone through some growth stages at the end. Or let me put it this way, there are multiple transitions that happen all through the story of the prodigal son. There's a transition from being a son in the home to being a heir. That's the point he receives the wealth. There's another transition from when he receives the wealth to when he goes to the faraway country. Then there's a transition from when he arrives in that country to when he loses his substance. Then there's another transition from when he loses to when he joins himself to the man in the faraway country, and the transition from being the rich guy to being the pig keeper. And then there's a transition from being the pig keeper to coming back home, and then the transition from coming back home to being reinstated back to sonship. You see multiple transitions, and at the end of each transition, we see a transformation. To try and explain it is this way. If you have a flight of stairs that go from first floor to second floor, first floor is the current state. Every step of the staircase is a transition, and the next floor is a transformation. You realize second floor is not more steps. Second floor is a totally different floor. It has different rooms, different possibilities, and second floor is not necessarily a replication of first floor. But to move from first floor to second floor, you go through a series of many steps. Some may be big, some may be small, some may be harder, but it's just a series of many steps. The steps are the transitions, the steps between. The floor levels are the transformation. What we are at the transformed state is not necessarily more of the transition or another version of the previous. A transformed state can be completely different. A hen's egg, the egg is one form of the hen. But then when the hen eggs hatch and produces the chick is not more of the egg. The chick is a totally different state from the egg. So you can begin thinking of transitions and transformations in that state. And when you consider the story of the prodigal son, at every stage you begin seeing a transformed individual. The boy with the money is very different from the boy in the pigsty. The boy in the pigsty is very different from the boy in front of his father. And so he's gone through multiple transitions. But you notice he does not have a lot of support in those transitions. You notice he does not handle his transitions well. But let me put it this way, is if you were to retell the story of the prodigal son, it would be nothing more but a chain of the transitions he's gone through and the transformations he's gone through and how he's handled them. That's basically the entire narrative. It's just a chain of transitions. When you reread the story, you realize him, just like we, and him, just like the generation we try to raise authentically, are either going through a transition, going to a transition, or coming from a transition. And how each of those is handled makes a difference between success and significance or peril and destruction. The boy makes a number of important things. He goes through what in modern day life we call quarter life crisis. Back then it definitely was not called that, but maybe they had a name for it. What is quarter life crisis? It is the period largely experienced by people from their late teens, around 18, and all the way through to their late 20s, and in quite a number of cases, all the way to their early 30s. And what it is marked by is a situation where people are making the three important decisions in life, but they do not have all the experience and they do not have all the resources. Now that's a ton of information, so let me just go into it piece by piece. What is the important decisions in life? It is three important decisions in life, and you see it in the prodigal son, and you also see it when you just look at it in your life or in the life of the next generation that we are trying to raise and to support. The three major decisions are, what will I do with my life? We call it calling, we call it vocation. In the prodigal son story, he decided his idea was just going to spend his substance on riotous living. That's what he made a decision for. And right now, the next generation being in their teens and in their 20s and a few in their early 30s, it is a time when they are making decisions about their career or their calling. What's their purpose? What's their calling? What will they live for? Is being made right now. The second simultaneously being made decision is a decision about who will they spend, who will be the most significant person in their life. We call it the decision about marriage or intimacy or about romance. And it's a significant decision to make because it your marriage partner or that significant person will make a whole ton of difference in your life. They will make you, they will break you, they will influence you in ways more than one. And it's an important or significant piece of that decision to be made. And in the case of the prodigal son, he, number one, united himself to people of a faraway land. So it seems he probably had maybe friends, maybe somebody intimate to spend time with. And then later on, when things went belly up, that set of friends left him and he went and joined himself again. He formed some form of relationship with somebody who assigned him to the pigs. Yeah, there's a lot we can do with that theologically, but hey, I will not go down that line, tempting as it may be. But just let me sneak in this in there and ask you, what do your friends or the people you've joined you do? Do they elevate you or do they take you to the pigs? Do they leave you to feed yourself off the pods, or do they bring you to a state where they nurture you, nourish you? And yes, in this stage of life that the next generation is having to navigate, they're making decisions that will join them with individuals who will either restore them and give them rings and robes like the father did, or they're joining themselves to individuals who will assign them to pigs and help them do nothing more but waste their substance on riotous living. The third important decision that the young man made in the prodigal son story, and that individuals are having to make now for the next generation, is a question of what role, if any, will God or faith play within my life. It is not explicit in the initial, but it becomes clear towards the end when this young man is coming back. He's come back to his senses. He says, I have sinned before God and before you. I'm not even worthy to be one of your servants. Make me, to be one of your sons, make me as one of your servants. So there was a certain change in the morality that guided this young man's life initially. Initially, God's ideas, God's institutions, God's individuals had no place in the door of his life. He made his own decisions. He pursued pleasure as the highest goal and good of his life. But somewhere he begins realizing this secular life, this one-term pursuit of pleasure has its limitations, has its dead end. In the midst of a crisis like that of a famine, he begins realizing, wait a minute, the center is no longer holding. And he has time to reflect. The Bible says he comes back to his senses, he comes back to his mind. And when he comes back, he has a deliberate discussion about not just what the role of family and its relationships will be, but it also seems that part of his discussion was about what's the role about faith and God going to be within his life. And he finally makes that third decision that God is going to be a part of his life. God is going to direct his life. In fact, the whole idea of him coming back to apologize to his father is premised on the idea that what he's done is not just wronged his father, he's not just wronged nature and environment and the cosmos. No, he says, no, I have wronged God in this action. So you clearly see step by step and with consequence, this young man is making three important decisions. And it's not one after another. These decisions are made simultaneously in his continuum of his life at this crucial defining point in his life. The decision about what will he do with his life. We call it career, some call it a job, some call it calling. The decision about what role will different relationships play in his life. Family had its place, friends had their place, intimate relationships had their place. So what role will different relationships have in his life? And thirdly is the decision about what role, if any, will God have within his life. And depending with how he made the decisions, he arrived where he was. Now, secondly, I said this young man does not have all the experience. So yes, he has to make all these three decisions, but what makes them difficult is he does not have all the experience. Certainly, at least to the end of the story, this young man had not had the experience of picking a certain career line, running with it all the way to the end, and then gaining all the experience and then coming back to the start and saying, yeah, now I know about farming or investing or partying, I'm good enough. At the beginning of the story, he doesn't have that experience. And it is exactly the same with many of the young men and women we need to support as becoming authentic. They're making important decisions about their career, but they don't have all the experience. Number two, this young man does not have all the resources. And resource here is not just monetary, because it becomes soon very clear that though he possessed money, it was not the only resource he needed to make a success of his life outside of the confines of home. He needed people skills, which it seems he did not have. His money may have gotten him friends here and there, but no sooner was the money gone, the only resource he had, money gone, then he begins realizing, wait, he needed to have built better social skills, better judgment, better professional skills than he initially possessed. So the second disadvantage this young man has is, yes, he's making 3 simultaneous important decisions, but he does not have all the important resources that would be needed. And many young people, similarly, do not just lack the experience they need, they also do not have the resources they require, whether the resources would be networks. And yeah, money is short very early in life, and it becomes a handicap if people do not have the right way of navigating that area of support. So there's a lack of experience, there's a lack of resources, and as was spoken in the session preceding this, you do well to pick the session on coaching and mentorship. This young man equally does not have all the requisite coaching and support that he needed. We did address coaching and support in the episode preceding this, and wherever you're catching this particular series, you do well to be able to follow up on the same. What was the result for this young man? Number one, he winds up somewhere. And I'm pausing because we need to realize this. Whichever way we deal with this next generation, they will end up somewhere. That somewhere could end up being a pigsty, having wasted your substance. So the next generation, trust me, if we were to tape another of these episodes 20 years from now, should Christ tarry that long, and we begin doing a census of the people we were targeting with a series of messages, where they are, each one of them will be somewhere. But the difference is this: some will be where they are on purpose, but some will be where they are out of purely panic. They will have gone through their transitions without radar, without compass, and without clue. And some will have gone through it with all the requisite support that they will have needed. And so, just with the story of the prodigal son, you see him ending up somewhere, but certainly it's not somewhere on purpose, it's not somewhere desirable, it's not somewhere intentional. It's as if what was happening here is a game of musical chairs. You know the game where if you're like 5 people, you put 4 chairs and you walk or move or jump or dance around the chairs as music is playing, and when the music abruptly stops, the requirement is you grab a chair nearest to you and you sit down. If we don't go through our transitions, if the generation in transition does not go through the transitions in purpose and with the requisite support, it feels at times like musical chairs. You reach 30, you're feeling like, hey, it's time to get married. You've not been intentional or deliberate about it. And hey, here you go, grabbing the person or the people nearest you, and you just settle down. And you end up with a wife with whom you're mated, but you're not matched. You end up with a career which you are salaried, but you're not satisfied. You end up pursuing a faith which is fine, but it is not fundamentally giving you the foundations you need for your life. And so, like the story of the prodigal son, this generation is in transit, and how they handle the transition makes the difference between whether they end up somewhere on purpose or not. And again, just to capture the challenge this generation in transition is going through, they're making decisions about the 3 important decisions of life. What will I do with my life? What relationships will I have, and which space will they occupy? What role, if any, will faith play within my life? And they're making these 3 decisions in a real environment where they don't have all the experience, they don't have all the resources, which is money and networks and the like, and then they don't always have all the support they need. The net result is for many of them, they just end up somewhere, but not somewhere on purpose. And then the second thing is many of them end up somewhere wrong, somewhere completely bad, a pigsty, or at times some end up dead or worse. If the next generation is going to be supported through their transitions, they don't need to, it can end better. They don't need to end up in pigsties where they are lonely, where they are isolated, where they are hungry in ways more than one, where they're trying to use bean pods for what they were never intended to do. Because these things I'm mentioning are intentional, because they are the symptoms of the quarter-life crisis that many of our young people have to needlessly go through, where they're trying to fill the vacuums of their lives with things that were not intended there. And I'm saying this intentionally so that you may begin reflecting on your life if you're going through the crisis, and you might reflect upon the kind of support you're giving if you're supporting people through this. If you're trying to use social media to gain a sense of importance, social media is not well designed for that. That may just be a sign of using bean pods to try and fill yourself. It will not do that. It may get you a few likes or many likes. It may get you followers, but it will not be able to get you anchored friends to do that. The second sign is the boy is in the pigsty by himself completely. So if you're finding yourself, maybe initially you're an extrovert, but now you're more introverted. When you go online, you're spending more time on Instagram, scrolling through people's photos, trying to compare their lives. And listen to the conversation, the self-talk this boy is having while at the pigsty. He's thinking how the servants in his home are having it better than him. There's a lot of comparison that happens when this generation goes in transition without the requisite support. There's a lot of comparison that happens with people online, people offline, and beginning to think, hey, my life sucks, people's lives elsewhere suck. And that is the tragedy if we go through as a generation in transition without the requisite support. We end up finding ourselves at a point where we are comparing ourselves needlessly and wrongly. So you find yourself using pods to try and feel yourself. You find yourself lonely and comparing yourself with others. And you find yourself in a pigsty. It's a place you did not intend. It's just the place where you find yourself where the music ended, and this is where I found myself. What do we need to think, whether you're the person in transition or whether you are the person supporting the people in transition? What we need to give people is, number one, the right information. If they're going to go through this transition properly, I can almost imagine if the fathers to the prodigal son gave him a proper talk before he left. At least the story does not seem to suggest he did. But I'm imagining if he was given the correct information, we'd go back to really where we talked about and told him in the positive sense, Adole, ugonjwa. What you're going through is a change. This is what is happening in your mind. This is really the change that is happening. If people were given the right information, it would empower them so that they do not see their transition as being weird or as being outlandish. I like it the way Paul says it in Corinthians, no temptation has come upon you but that which is common to men. At times when this generation is going through internal and identity struggles, they need to be reminded, hey, you know what? This is not abnormal. You're going through the final phase of mental development. These are the changes that are happening to you hormonally and emotionally, and this is to be anticipated and expected, and then they can be able to do a better job. So I think the first thing to support the generation in transit is to give them information that boosts awareness. Awareness is often the thing they need to know so that they can go through it with the confidence that, okay, I'm not going through a weird situation. Then secondly, they needed to be given what the father gave the son towards the end, a true sense, a clear sense of identity. So besides information, what this generation in transition, the biggest struggle they have through the quarter life is a struggle of identity. And they try to get the identity by the friends they have. The boy tried that, wasted his substance on riotous living. They try to get the identity by the work. He ends up finding himself in a pigsty, a work he hates, a work that does not fulfill him. And so if the boy knew what he ended up knowing at the end, that you're my son, you're worthy of a robe, you're worthy of a ring, if he probably knew that, and the many reasons and he probably didn't know that, it probably would have prevented him from going down this rabbit hole unnecessarily. And so similarly, to support a generation in transition, we may need to get better at giving them experiences that help them build their identity, not from what they do, but from whose they are. At the very end of the story, the father reminds the son about his identity that is generated not from performance, but from whose he is. I usually listening to people telling others, a man is this, a man is his belt, a man is his shoes, a man is his watch. And I remind them, no, a man is whose he is. It is not what he has. And while this generation is trying to be trying to be a cheap copy of something or of someone else, somebody needs to tiptoe, and in order to give them the right support, it's going to be a support that helps them claim their identity in God. So two things that will give the right support for this generation is, number one, information that creates the proper awareness, and number two, identity that helps them be able to become grounded. It's true, the generation we are having to support to become real people with real skills for a real world are navigating challenging transitions of trying to do three important questions of life with little support, with little resource. But we can do something for them. We can help them be able to find their identity in God, and we can help them be able to find information that helps them have an awareness. When we do that, we'll help them to be able to transition in a way that gets them to a place of significance and success deliberately. Till next time, let's stay with this conversation and let's raise an authentic change.